My dad had a book that I would look at when I was a little kid, and I have it right here actually. It's a book called 6 Seconds in Dallas, and the subtitle is Irrefutable Evidence that Oswald could not have killed JFK alone. So as a little kid, I didn't really know much about politics or President Kennedy. I just knew that my dad was a big fan of President Kennedy, and he had an interest in the assassination, like what really happened, and sort of, the Warren Commission and investigating it. And so this is just one of the books that was at my house. My dad was a big reader, and so I was familiar with this book, and as I got older, I learned more about the conspiracy theories related to the assassination. And then I guess, I'm trying to remember when the movie was, but the Oliver Stone film, JFK, is 1991. So that was right about when I started. I was in college at the time. So, I was thinking critically about lots of different things. And I was interested, to see Oliver Stone's sort of take on the assassination and some of the conspiracy theories that were out there. And, I don't know that there was a whole lot to the movie itself, but it at least, I guess what it did was it sort of legitimized that there were still very serious questions about the assassination and, people not knowing really what exactly happened. I think I'm sort of undecided is probably the best way to describe it. And the reason I say so is that, I'm familiar with Earl Warren. He was the Chief Justice of the United States, so I know, I'm familiar with his work on the Supreme Court. And, that's my area of media law. This is what I teach. So I know what Earl Warren has done on the court. So when he led this commission, I would put a lot of deference in the government commission to examine what happened. And I understand, the quest for knowledge is to question, what we get from the government or what people say is the truth. We're entitled, under our First Amendment rights to question things and to explore things. And we have found that things that we thought were true, we find out later were not. So I'm sort of open. I guess if I leaned one way, I'd sort of lean toward the lone gunman theory. It seems to me that, when I review the evidence in a very superficial way, not an in-depth way, it seems that that's what the evidence supports. But I'm also open, to the idea that there may have been other people involved. There may have been other shooters involved. I know there's lots of questions, and we may never know. But I don't have any strong subscription to any one theory. Like I said, I might lean toward the Warren Commission just because of my knowledge of Earl Warren. But I couldn't say that one theory was more correct than another. I think they are just what they are. They're theories, based on evidence that suggests certain things, and that's kind of the best we can do at this point without additional information. There are arguments, that the Bill of Rights, are about the rights of citizens, but it's also about the rights of people who are here, whether they are lawful citizens or not. So they're really basic human rights. So that's part of the argument as far as why the Fifth and Sixth Amendments might apply. So that's number one. Number two, it might be true, that the Miranda requirement, wasn't yet in place. But, you still would have to look at custody, and as far as questioning, that if he was asking for a lawyer, any lawyers up, so to speak, that there would have been a process for that to happen. But you raise a good point, though. When you talk about the assassination of the President of the United States, the leader of our country, and you have somebody who has renounced American citizenship and I think was a Russian citizen or was applying for Russian citizenship, then that sort of raises issues about national security, about enemy combatants. That's really kind of what, those are some of the arguments that we have today in terms of terrorism. And I think we see some of that uncertainty, like how do you treat someone like Oswald? And it's like when I look back, I can understand why law enforcement, might have been unsure about what the legal process would be. In addition, you've got local law enforcement, you've got the Secret Service, you've got the FBI, you certainly have the CIA involved. So when you get sort of that alphabet soup of law enforcement agencies, you can see where there would be a lot of uncertainty about how to proceed. And I'm sure that, I think I remember reading reports about conflicting information about whose jurisdiction it was, who was in charge, and custody of the body, and autopsy, and all those things, because of these overlapping jurisdictions. I mean, it really was a shock in so many different ways. Well, I mean, I think that the role for the journalists has been true since the ratification of the Bill of Rights, and the freedom of the press. The idea that journalists are watchdogs. Their job is to to borrow SPJ's, the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Their job is to seek truth and report it. And sometimes the truth is hard to swallow. Sometimes it's difficult, to know what the truth is, but that's what journalists are mandated to do. So when you have these conspiracy theories, the answer to conspiracy theories is truth, right? It's to reveal as much as we can so that we can ascertain what really happened. So people are always going to disagree. We're just not going to get to a point where everyone agrees 100% of the time. But I think when you look at the evidence, I think reasonable people, will be able to reach similar conclusions. We may disagree on some of the details, but it's clear that there are people all over the spectrum. I think for journalists, in times like this, it's not to contribute to the confusion. The role of the journalist is to try to shed light on the truth. And sometimes the way you get there is by asking the right questions and by scrutinizing, right? So if the government says this is how it happened, it means that the journalist doesn't just accept that as truth. But it doesn't mean that the journalist thinks that all of that's false. I think it means that the journalist verifies that information.